Welcome to your weekly news digest based on the European press. Here are the main stories of the week. Berlin offers Ukraine associate EU membership instead of full. A NATO aircraft shoots down a drone over Estonia. The Baltic states lack bomb shelters and are preparing for the worst. Putin returns from Beijing without a key deal. Gazprom shares fall. Poland, like Germany, loses part of the American contingent. How Tusk reacted and what the press is writing. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz put forward an initiative this week that immediately sparked fierce debate across Europe. He proposed granting Ukraine associate membership in the European Union, an intermediate status under which Kiev would be allowed to attend meetings of the EU's governing bodies, but without voting rights. In the Chancellor's vision, this would be a first step on the path to full membership. The Stuttgarter Zeitung welcomed the idea. It would be a concrete signal to the people of Ukraine that their painful struggle is worthwhile, and it would send a very clear message to the Kremlin that it will not win this war. Ukraine could become the driving force behind economic recovery in the EU once the war is over. And in view of Russia's aggressive expansionist policy, Ukraine has another, very weighty argument. The country has the best army in Europe. Berlin's TASS warned of unforeseen legal consequences. Merz wants to activate the Mutual Assistance Clause enshrined in the EU treaty. EU countries would suddenly be obliged to stand by Kiev if the war with Russia escalates. Nobody knows what that would mean in practice. Merz shoots from the hip again. The consequences are impossible to foresee. Vienna's Der Standard took a sober view. For formal reasons alone, EU membership for a country at war is out of the question, and Merz knows this perfectly well. The paper noted that Ukraine's de facto integration is already underway. No other candidate country has ever received so many billions in loans and grants. In parallel, the paper argues, a dual strategy towards Russia is needed: pressure and sanctions combined with diplomacy. The sharpest reaction came from the Ukrainian outlet European Pravda. Its commentator saw in the proposal not a gesture of support, but a trap. The path proposed by the German Chancellor is designed to ensure that we remain in the waiting room of the European Union for years to come, while at the same time opening the door to other candidate countries, including Moldova. During this period, Ukraine would have no advantages whatsoever and no influence over the functioning of the European Union, but would be obliged to submit to its decisions. Furthermore, the status proposed by Merz could not be legally guaranteed. Ukraine could even lose this status in the event of a change of government in Berlin or Brussels. Drones over the Baltics. NATO fires for the first time, and there aren't enough shelters for everyone. This week, the Baltic states encountered something that, until recently, seemed unthinkable. For the first time in history, NATO fighter jets shot down a drone in the alliance's airspace, over a lake in Estonia. There was also an air raid alert in Vilnius, where residents were asked to take shelter. In Latvia, the ruling coalition collapsed entirely in early May, amid disputes over whose drones had been falling on the country's territory and who bore responsibility. The picture painted by the Baltic and European press is alarming. The region proved unprepared, either technically or organizationally. The origin of the drones remains disputed. Zurich's weekly Weltwoche outlined the contradiction between two versions. Moscow claims that Ukrainian drones are using Baltic airspace on their way to targets in Russia. Ukraine insists that Russia itself is diverting drones into the Baltic states through electronic jamming. NATO and the EU side with the latter interpretation. Let us stick to the indisputable facts. They are frightening enough. Two warring parties are turning NATO territory into a war zone, Weltwoche concluded, adding that no European peace initiative has emerged. Riga's Neotkariga addressed the drone problem in Latvia. The instruction to hide behind walls and stay away from windows basically amounts to, "It's up to you to look after yourselves." Latvia has neither a drone defense system, nor a civil defense system, nor a contingency plan, nor a law permitting the shooting down of drones, nor weapons capable of doing this. In Lithuania, the air raid alert exposed a different problem. Kauno Diena wrote caustically about how the evacuation actually unfolded. The head of state was promptly taken to a shelter, while members of parliament were instructed to seek shelter too. We also learned that there was nowhere near enough room for everyone. So the question is, did those who did not get a place in the shelter also feel safer, as the Speaker of Parliament claimed, or do they simply not count as people? Putin in Beijing. Partner or supplicant? Putin's visit to China this week revealed a gap between the official picture and the real balance of power. Moscow increasingly looks like the supplicant in this alliance, not an equal. European outlets were remarkably united in their assessment. Formally, the visit was presented as a meeting of equals. Putin described Russian-Chinese relations as being at an unprecedentedly high level. Yet the main expected outcome was not achieved. China refused to sign an agreement on the construction of the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline, through which Russia had been counting on delivering an additional 50 billion cubic meters of gas per year. Turin's La Stampa recorded the market reaction. Gazprom's share price on the Moscow Stock Exchange dropped by 3.5% immediately after the meeting. The hopes that the visit would prove very important, as Putin's spokesman Dmitry Peskov had promised in advance, simply failed to materialize. Berlin's TASS painted a picture of deep Russian dependence. Putin needs to try and offload his gas onto his eastern neighbor as quickly as possible, and at a huge discount. She is squeezing Russia like a lemon. Russia now sources 36% of all its imports from China. Chinese cars, lorries, and buses already dominate new car sales in Russia and have virtually wiped out Russian factories. With his imperialist policies, Putin is turning his vast empire into a Chinese province. France Inter columnist Pierre Hasky drew attention to the composition of the Russian delegation, which included several major oligarchs from the energy sector. For China, Russia is a treasure trove of fossil fuels on its doorstep. The construction of a new pipeline through Mongolia is planned in principle, and the route has been determined, but Beijing has made no concrete commitments. The conclusion? The energy partnership between the two countries will only deepen, but it is exclusively China that dictates the terms. The United States withdraws troops from Europe. Allies at a loss. Washington has called off plans to deploy the promised 4,000 troops to Poland. Prime Minister Donald Tusk has already asked the United States not to jeopardize the friendship and reminded Washington, America won't find a better ally anywhere. At the same time, the Pentagon is cutting its contingent in Germany by around 5,000 troops. Britain's The Spectator warned that the main threat is not in the numbers. Much more worrying for NATO's European member states is the prospect of losing a range of capabilities of which the United States is the only or vastly predominant provider. NATO relies almost exclusively on the U.S. for space-based assets like satellites to provide comprehensive intelligence, surveillance, targeting acquisition, and reconnaissance. Lithuania's Delfi analyzed the U.S. decision. There are only two rational conclusions to be drawn here. Either the U.S. intelligence services currently see no real threat from Russia and therefore consider large military deployments in the region to be unnecessary. Or, if they do perceive a threat, the U.S. has no intention of becoming embroiled in a direct military conflict for the sake of Eastern Europe. Neither scenario is good news for Vilnius. This shows there is a shift in U.S. global strategy, away from the unhesitating fulfillment of regional commitments and towards minimizing its own risk. Krakow's weekly Tygodnik Powszechny drew attention to an unexpected dimension of the problem, the economic one. The withdrawal of U.S. troops from Germany means the loss of thousands of jobs. The far-right populist Alternative for Germany stands to benefit most from this. The party already achieved record results in the last local elections in Bavaria. The stagnation of Germany's economy is putting the wind in the AfD's sails. That was your weekly roundup of the major events as seen through the eyes of the European press. If you found this edition useful, please like it and leave a comment. Subscribe to stay informed alongside us. And if you'd like to support the project, all the details are in the description below.